This is Casey Finnerty of the Winona State University Biology Department, and what I have today is a video to help students in organismal diversity with the spreadsheet that they will use to report and analyze their data for their plant growth project. And so what you see on the screen right now is the sheet with some data that has been filled in just as like a placeholder for this demo, and you'll be replacing it with your own data. So the first thing that I should point out is at the bottom of this window you see a number of tabs. There's one tab that's labeled example, which is just basically a copy of this worksheet that you see in front of you that you can refer to if for some reason you mess up your worksheet and you want to see what an unedited copy looks like. On the next tab is the first one that you'll have to enter some information on, and that's just simply the last name and first name of the members of your plant project group. And so please make sure that everyone's name is on here so that we can contact you if we have any questions. Then if we go to the next tab, it's labeled Annual 1. And so it is assumed that each group grew approximately about 20 plants. Most groups, what they did is they planted 4 different species, 2 of which were annuals and 2 of which were perennials. And for each of those species, they planted probably about 5 pots worth of plants. Now, when you were initially planting, a number of you followed your instructor's advice, which was to perhaps plant multiple seeds in each pot, thereby increasing your chances of success. But by the same token, once the seedlings started to germinate within a pot, it was recommended that you cull out or remove the extra plants and just retain 1 seedling per pot, so that it wouldn't be competing with its other seedlings in the same pot. So as you fill in your data, let me point out that there are 3 areas which you'll be using to enter information. The first one is this box at the top. And in this box at the top is just an area where you'll be entering in information for that's identifying what data is on this individual worksheet. So under the first box, you'll see here a common name, and so just replace the annual 1 that's been entered in here with the common name for your plant. So for example, let's say you planted corn as an annual, so I'm entering corn into that cell. And then next to it is a box for the scientific name, which for corn is Zea mays. Now, if you have trouble finding the scientific name, you may leave that blank, but it's usually best if you could put it in if you could look it up. And then just a box to indicate whether this is an annual or a perennial. Again, it's assumed that you're going to be entering the data for an annual if you're on this worksheet at the bottom here that's labeled annual. Next is your average seed weight data, which you collected in lab. And then finally, 2 boxes that are going to be critical to the analysis. One is the box labeled date planted, and please use this format that's indicated where you have 2 digits for the month, a slash, 2 digits for the day, a slash, and then 4 digits for the year. And then this last box is the number of seeds that were planted for this plant. And this is important for you to be able to calculate your germination rate. So again, let's say for example you planted 5 pots and you had as many as 20 seeds that were planted. So that would be 4 seeds per pot. You were then instructed to track which ones started to germinate and break the soil over a number of days, and for most students this is about 2 weeks. And so you enter into this cell the total number of seeds that were planted in all those pots. Okay, not necessarily the number that you eventually used for your plant growth data in terms of the leaf area. Because again, it was assumed that if you were lucky enough to have a seedling grow in every one of those 5 pots, this is probably going to be dropping down to about 5 plants by the time your project is on its way. So in the next block of data, which you see here, you see it's labeled germination data. So this is for all seeds planted for this species. So the first thing is there's a column for the germination date. So again, you were asked to come in on a regular basis in that early time period following your planting and note when seeds started to pop up out of the ground. And one thing that I've done on these worksheets is I've put in italics all the cells where you're expected to be entering data, your own data. And I've left as a regular format, meaning not italics, those cells that you should not be presumably entering anything because they'll be calculated for you using a formula. And so, for example, let's say you came in on September 20th and you noted on that day that one seedling had started to break through the soil. And so the number germinated in this cell would be 1. Now I've skipped over this cell here, the germination time, and that's because there's a formula that will calculate this for you. So if you enter 9/20/2015, as the first time that you checked on your pots, what happens is that in this cell there's a little formula, and if we go up to the formula bar, it may be difficult for you to read, but it says equals B9 minus F $4. And let's walk you through that. So equals is to tell the program that this is a formula that's going to be entered into the cell. And then B9, if we look at it, here's column B, and it's row 9. So it's this date, obviously the date where you're making this observation. And then it says minus F $4. Well, let's find cell F4. Well, lo and behold, it's column F, and the 4th row down, this is your original planting date. And so what this formula is simply doing is subtracting this planting date from the date of your first observation of a seedling germinating, and it's calculating the difference. And so that is a total of 6 days, which is now automatically entered into the cell. So you don't have to go through looking at a calendar and figuring out how many days it took for a certain seedling to germinate. Then down here, this column of cells is referring to the percent of plants that have germinated, or I'm sorry, percent of seeds that have germinated by that point. So if we click on this, again, this is a formula, so you don't need to enter anything here yourself. But let's click on this cell and now look in the formula bar up here to see what it says. It says equals D9 divided by G $4. And so the equals again tips the program off that you're about to enter a formula. And now let's take D9. So here's column D, row 9, and so that's this cell reference. And so it's taking your one seedling that you've reported now in the form, and it's dividing it by what? Well, the contents of cell G4. So if we look over here, here's column G, row 4. This is those 20 seeds that you planted. So one seed out of 20 planted had germinated by September 20th. Okay, so 1 divided by 20 and then converted to a percentage means 5%. 5% of the seeds have germinated by that date. And that's the type of calculation that we're asking you to do. Now you may have noticed that in both of these formulae, there's a $ in one of these cell references. And what that $ does is that it converts the cell reference, in this case G4, from a relative reference, as it's termed, to what's called an absolute reference. And what that means is that wherever the $ appears, what it's saying is that the next digit, in this case the 4, is to be held constant. It's an absolute reference. And where that comes into play is if you're filling the formula in as you go down from one row to the next row to the next row, and the easiest way to do that is to just grab this little square at the corner of this selection box, and you just drag it down, and then it fills in the formula for the next row down. And what that's telling is that each time as you shift down a register, it is saying hold this row number up here absolute. Don't change it, because we don't want it to go from 20 to now a blank cell to one that says leaf area data to replicate, because that would just be nonsense. That would be entered into here for your formula. Notice, however, though, as we click down from one cell to the next and look at our cell references for the numerator, meaning the number generated over here in this column, that the row reference does change. In this case, let's see. Oops. Oh, yes, back here again. So if we just click here on this reference, you notice that it says D9 is the numerator of this ratio. And if we click down here, D10, and here D11, and so on. And so that's where the difference is, the important difference is between absolute and relative references. Now I noticed that by dragging down, I got rid of my little border here, so I'm going to restore that like so. All right, so then let's say that you have germination data, and you may have germination data that not quite so many days where you noted the seedlings, and that's fine. But it would help things if you would then eliminate any of these rows that should be empty because you didn't make an observation. So, for example, let's say you only took germination notes on, say, 4 different days. So then these last 2 rows should be cleared. And the way you do that is just to select the rows like so, and then just hit delete, and it'll clear them. Notice now that this graph that is graphing the germination rate over time has updated to reflect the fact that there are no data now at these 5th and 6th data points. And that'll be helpful because we don't want your graph showing this kind of filler data that I've put into the spreadsheet. We want the graph to be showing just your own data. So make sure you don't forget to have it that your worksheet has your data and your data only entered onto it. And so I'm going to hit the back button just to restore those data. And again, you'll see that the chart updates on its own. Now if we slide over to the right, we see there's a very wide box over here for entering your leaf area data. Now, one thing that I failed to point out at the beginning is that because you have 4 different species, it would be an extremely large worksheet that you'd need to wrangle in order to get all your data for all your plants entered onto one worksheet. And so that's why I did split this up between a separate worksheet for every species that you're working with, the 2 annuals and the 2 perennials down here. And so while you're still on this first worksheet, please just be entering the data for your first species. So in this example, we were saying was corn. So in this box that has this outline, you see it says leaf area data. And what I've done is I've entered in up to 5 replicates, the assumption being that I don't think any student grew more than 5 pots of 5 plants in 5 different pots. And so we have those 5 replicates arranged across this box as you go across, as you see. And so if we just focus on the first replicate, you'll see that again, where there are numbers in italics, that's where you'll be entering in your raw data. Where the numbers are not in italics, those are formulae that will calculate those numbers for you. And so the first one is, the first column is leaf area measurement date. And so again, we keep that format of month, day, year with those numbers of digits. And the observation dates where you've taken your leaf area measurements are then put into this column. And then across here, what I have are three columns, one for leaf length, one for leaf width, and then for the number of leaves. So remember, what we were asking is that you'd measure the length, the width of a representative leaf, and then multiply it up by the total number of leaves. Now, the spreadsheet is set up for that, which is probably the most useful way of doing this as the leaves start to get more and more numerous on your plants. But some of you may not have that data anymore. You may have just collected the length, the width, and done your multiplication, the day you took your measurement, and all you have is your total leaf area data. That's fine. Feel free to just overwrite the cells in this column with the number that you have, rather than letting the formula do it. Okay. So, but again, assuming that you have these raw data, this might be helpful to you, even as a way just to double check your calculations that it didn't make any errors when you're typing them into your calculator. So in this first column, we again have our dates where we took our leaf area data. And then in the next column, we have a formula that again calculates the days since the seeds were planted. So because we want to be graphing the growth or the accumulation of leaf area over time since the planting date. And so that formula is very similar to the one we showed you before. So when I click on this cell, you, you see that it says equals G9. So again, this date right here, G9, in this cell, minus F4. And so F4 being that planting date. You notice here that there's a $sign before the F and the 4, not just the 4 this time. And that's because we wanted to hold constant not just the row reference for this cell, but also the column reference, meaning the F. And the reason why is that this formula was copied and pasted then across this table to use it for all these different replicates, and that way I didn't have to re-enter the formula each time, changing those cell references. It held that steady. What did change was the reference for these measurement dates, because they might have been different for some of your replicates, and so I wanted to take that into account. And then in these columns, obviously, is where you enter your raw data for your measurements and your numbers of leaves that you counted up. And then finally, for the total leaf area, that's simply the product of these three numbers. So you see, if I click on this, it says equals I9. So again, that references this cell, times J9. That's the width, this cell, times K9. And that's this cell, which is the number of leaves. So you multiply the average length, the average width, by the number of leaves, or we should say more representative length and width by the number of leaves, and you get the total leaf area in centimeters squared. And so this exact same table now is reproduced for your 4 additional replicates, for a total of 5 replicates. And again, the cell references have changed now to reference the correct cells. So in this case, we're taking the difference to get the number of days planted of N9 versus F4. So N9 being this cell here with this leaf measurement date. And again, the product that's represented in this column, or in this cell, I should say, is P9 times Q9 times R9. So again, this cell times this cell times this cell. Same rules apply here. If you have days, or we should say cells that should not have any data because your plants failed to grow, or you didn't have any measurements on that, on a certain day. Maybe you only took measurements on 3 different days, not a total of 5. Please select those cells and hit backspace to delete, so that we don't have this filler data being mixed in with your own data. I should note too that if you were kind of an eager beaver and took data over additional days, that say you have more than was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, more than 5 different dates when you measured, you're more than welcome to enter those data. In fact, you're encouraged to do so. And if you like those formula to extend, again, if you just say click on a cell like so, and drag this box down. So let's say you had 2 more dates that you were collecting data. just drag it down, and if we now click on this, you can see that the references have changed now to reflect this cell N14 and now this one N15. So everything is looking great. What you may have noticed is that, gosh, there's a really strange date of 1784 that's entered in here, and that's just kind of nonsense because there's nothing entered into this cell, and so we need to obviously put a date in there. So, for example, if I put in something reasonable like, oh, I don't know, November 5th, 2015, like so, and hit enter, you can see now that this updates with a reasonable date. And so I'm going to undo all those changes just so we can return to the spreadsheet as it was before. All right, so now if we I did kind of gloss over the fact that there is a graph here for your germination data, and what it shows on the axes are germination rate on the y-axis and the days since planting on the x-axis. And so you can see how the germination rate has increased over time, which it should as the seedlings start popping up. And yours may not look exactly like this, obviously, but it should look similar to something like this if you had success. And one thing I'm going to point out, very important, is that later on you're going to be wanting to compare the germination rate between your various plants. And so the question is, well, which rate are we comparing? Is it at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the experiment? And the one we're interested in is the one at the end of the experiment. So by the very end, when you've said, okay, you're essentially calling time and saying enough's enough, let's take our data. We want to know, okay, well, how many seedlings have popped up by that date? And so that would be this one, the 75%. That was the maximal germination rate that you reached. And the same thing is going to apply for this leaf area data in a moment, as I'll explain. All right, so now let's slide over here towards the end of your leaf area, your box of leaf area data. And before I get to the graph, I just want to point out there's an important little group of data right over here on the end. And this is the average of all of your replicates. And so, again, the whole purpose of doing multiple replicates for each species that you're examining is that there's going to be natural variation within a species on its growth rate. And so we want to have multiple plants sampling. We want to be sampling multiple plants so our data is accurate and reflective of what the leaf area or growth rate would be for these plants naturally. And so what I've done, if we click on this cell, you should not have to enter any data in these cells if you've been following along and entering your data correctly up till now. So if I click on this, you see it says equals, so again it's the formula average, and then there's a parentheses, and there's a set of cell references in those parentheses, and those references are H9, O9, V9, AC9, AJ9. And so what we're looking at, if we look at, say, the last one, so we don't have to be scrolling all over the place, if we go down over here to AJ9, what is averaging is the days since planting at your first leaf area measurement. Okay, now this could get a little hairy because if you weren't measuring your different replicates on the same day, this could kind of mess up this graph a bit, and so I'm a bit concerned about how we graph those data. So I think this might be the best way to do it because I think most people are measuring their plants all on the same day. And this way we could graph the average of the leaf area growth, which might be the most informative thing for us to be examining at this point. It's not critical. However, if you had your plants and you're measuring their leaf areas at different times, say plant 1, replicate 1, you were measuring on one day, and replicate 2 on another day, you can talk to me, Dr. Faraday or Dr. Larson, about ways that you might want to graph that, say individually as different data sets on the same graph, just to show how your different replicates were varying one from another. But for now, we'll just leave this graph as is because it's not critical to your final conclusions. All right, so that's the average of the day since planting, and then we have total leaf area. So again, this is the average. If you see, it's equals average, and there are various 5 different cell references, and those are referring to the numbers in this column that you have repeated again 5 times for your different replicates. And that formula now, the references change appropriately as we go down from one row to the next, so that it's averaging the correct references and cells in that same row. And then this graph just shows on the y-axis total leaf area in centimeters squared, and on the x-axis the day since planting. So it's average total leaf area per plant versus time, as shown here. And obviously that should be increasing over time. All right, so now that I've walked you through how to enter the data for one plant, and again, you're just putting in that information in those cells that have numbers in italics. So basically some dates and some measurements, and then all the calculations are done for you. And in fact, indeed, the graphs are then plotted for you as you enter your data and update it. It'll update automatically. And so now you have 2 kind of informative graphs for your first species. So now go ahead and then working through these different tabs, you can replace this filler data on each of these tabs with your data. And so again, start up here with this box of identification with the common name of the plant, the scientific name, seed weight, date planted, number planted, etc. And then your dates and number of seedlings germinated, and then the leaf area is over in this box over here. And all those graphs will automatically update. And so you walk your way through getting those data entered for annual 1, annual 2, and then your 2 perennials as shown on these tabs here. So now let's say you have all of that done. And so what we want to do is kind of look at our data so we can make our final conclusions. Again, if you have an incomplete data set, and it sounds like that might be many of you, make sure that you clear the cells if you have no data for a certain replicate or if you have no data for a certain species, because again, we do not want to be looking at this filler data. We want to just be looking at your own data. And so if we get down to this last tab, this is the one that's a bit tricky because I can't really set up the spreadsheet with the assumption that everybody has a complete data set. If I knew that to be the case, then I could have this all pre-filled out for you, and you'd have to do virtually nothing. But because there is, as we'll say euphemistically, mixed success with this project, we're going to have to show you how to set up this final worksheet and final analysis so that just your data is being represented on this tab. And that'll become clear as I walk through it. So I'm going to slide over here, and we're going to look just over here at the germination rate data analysis, and then later on over here we're going to look at the growth rate analysis, meaning that leaf area. And so if we look at germination rate, we have over here plant type. So I've just put annual 1, annual 2, perennial 1, perennial 2, using those same types of references that are on these tabs at the bottom of the window. And so what we want to do is put in, just because it's easier for us to kind of look at and assess, if we actually see the name of the plant, we want to put those names into these cells. Feel free to go ahead and just type them in yourself. I'll just show you a way that we can use it using a cell reference, but either one works. And so the first plant was corn, so again, the student may just type that in. But if we just want to use a formula, I'm just typing the very simple formula of equals, and then I'm going to click onto this first tab, because we're referring to this annual 1 data, and scroll way over here where the name was. And you notice that there's this floating box that has shown up. It's still waiting for the cell reference, even though we've moved to a different worksheet. And I'm going to click on this cell right here, the corn. So now if we go back to the annual versus perennial, we see that it's referring now to the annual 1 tab and to cell B4, which is where that corn name was entered. So now we just hit the return or enter key, and corn has been entered for us. And so likewise, if I just hit equals and click on the Annual 2 tab, click on this cell that contains the name, and then go back to this tab and hit return. Annual 2 now has been entered as a name. And so if we just finish this, equals, go to the perennial 1 tab, click on the name, and here's a little shortcut. You could actually just hit the enter right now, and it takes you back to this tab, and then hit it again. It shows you the formula. Hit it a third time, and the formula now has been completed. And so the last one is equals. We'll go to the perennial 2 tab. I gotta scroll over here, and there's the perennial 2 name. Hit enter, go back to this tab, hit enter again. It just confirms the formula. Hit enter, and now we're good as gold. And so now you can see that this chart has updated so that each of these categories has been updated to reflect what's in this column. So again, as you enter in the names of your plants, say you had corn here and tomato over here, then this would update to show tomato onto this category. So now remember before when I was talking about germination rates and which ones to use, and I said, well, use the final one that you measure. How many seedlings showed up by the end of when you were taking your measurements. And so we're going to do that same approach here. So for germination rate, I'm going to click on this and hit equals, and now go to the Annual 1 tab, and again it's the germination by the end of the experiment, so we hit that cell or select it, and then hit enter again and again, and we're all set. And so now we'll do this again. So equals Annual 2, we're in the Annual 2 tab, and so we're going to select this one. Now I just use the same set of filler data for every one of these worksheets, so it's going to be pretty boring. It's going to look like 75% across this chart, but that's okay. You get the picture. And now perennial 1, so I enter equals to tell it that a formula is about to be entered. Go to the perennial 1 tab, click on that cell, enter, enter, enter. Okay, and each time the table is being updated. And then finally equals perennial 2 tab. We're selecting that final germination rate, which is the same as everybody else, and the table now has been updated. So in this experiment with all this filler data, everything looks exactly the same. Not a big deal. But this way, when you get your own data entered in here, if you were successful in getting some germination rates from multiple plants, you can see how they compare one to another graphically, which is often a lot easier to interpret than just staring at numbers. Again, if you do not have data for a certain plant, you want to get rid of that. And so the way to do that, so let's say you didn't get any data for your second perennial, for example. If we select these cells and hit backspace or delete, you see that the table updates to just reflect 3 species. And so again, you don't want to be looking at data that's nonsense or just filler data that I put in for the demonstration. So now I'm going to hit undo so that gets undone, so to speak. Okay, so if we now slide over to the growth rate comparison. One thing you may have noticed is that when I was doing this and selecting these germination rates, I was selecting the cell that was appropriate for the data that I filled in myself. But again, if you only took measurements on like 3 different days, you're going to be selecting just that last day's worth of data in terms of that germination rate, say here, and making sure that all these other cells are going to be blank. And so that's why I could not essentially create this this individual tab to represent everybody's data, because I know from early feedback and reports that not everybody got the same complete data set. All right, so now if we do the same thing over here, plant name, as I did before, they'll get filled in. And you can do that. Here's kind of a quick and dirty way of getting this done. I'm going to, I've selected on this cell, and I'm going to hit equals for a formula. And rather than go back to all those individual tabs, I'm going to essentially rely on the fact that I did it correctly over here and just refer to this cell over here. And then I'm going to hit return. And lo and behold, corn shows up. And so now instead of having to enter this individually, I know that as I go down each row, I want this reference to go down by one row at a time. So I can just click on this corn cell, take this, click on this handle here for this of the selection box, drag down, and the formula will be entered correctly, and the correct cell reference will be entered as shown here. So isn't that lovely? Now, the other thing I want to do is calculate, or that you want to do, is calculate the growth rate. And so what we mean by rate is usually, in general, that term refers to a change over time. And so in this case, we're looking at the rate of growth in terms of leaf area. So, and that's in units of centimeters squared, as shown here, per day. So that's unit of time. And so we want to see how much they are growing per day by the end of the experiment. And so here's how we're going to calculate those data. So let's go ahead and click on the cell, and I'm going to hit equals. And let's go back to that first tab for annual 1. We go back here. Now we need to scroll over here. And we are interested in the end result, as just like before with the germination data. So I'm going to click on the total leaf area, and now we want to divide that by the number of days it took to accumulate that leaf area, which is right here. And so I'm going to hit the slash or division symbol, and then I'm going to click on this cell reference, and I'm going to hit now enter. It takes us back to this page, enter again, so we can kind of confirm the formula, and you can see that it's referring to worksheet annual 1, and those cells, and now enter again, and that's taken care of. Now we can't simply go down and drag this formula down from one row to the next, because our cell references are not going to change simply by row, but they're actually changing by tab down here. And so we have to do this individually now for each of these cells. So not a big deal. Just hit equals annual 2, and now we scroll over to where those averages are calculated, and we're going to take this 180 square centimeters divided by 49, this one, hit return, it's entered in. Because I use the same filler data on every tab, it's the exact same number, no problem. And so now we enter this perennial tab now, perennial 1, scroll over, this cell divided by this cell, hit return, go back, double check, everything's good. And then finally equals, go back to our perennial 2 sheet, scroll over to our averages here, take the final total leaf area measured, and then divide that by the number of days, enter, enter, enter. And there we go. And so this chart looks kind of funky. And so let's go ahead and redo it. So I'm going to delete this, and we're going to put in a chart. Oops, that was strange. Let me go ahead and select this, and I'll just take this drop down box and do delete chart. There we go. Now it's disappeared. And let's go ahead and insert a chart. So I'm going to select these cells and select the insert chart button, and now this comes up. So let's see, I think we would want something like this. Sounds good. Let's double check our references, and like so. Hit OK. Yeah, so I've noticed a little bit of a bug where sometimes you saw that first chart had just this blue monolith of data, and that wasn't representing the four different um, sets of data that we're looking at. And so sometimes just that little trick of reselecting the range of cells that the chart's going to use is all you need to do, and then it works out fine, and as shown here. Um, so now here's a growth rate versus plant name. I don't think we really need to change anything. I don't know if we really need a legend here. It seems a bit over the top. And so if I click on customization, I can just click the legend box and just say none, and that'll disappear. But then everything else looks pretty good. And I'll hit insert and move it over so it's not obscuring our data. And boom, there's your chart. So now, presumably you'll see some differences between your different plants, and this chart will be useful to helping to interpret those differences in growth rates. Well, that's it for now. And so let myself or Dr. Larson know if you have any questions, but I hope that this worksheet will be helpful to you in terms of analyzing your data, and it will certainly be helpful to all of us by having you report your data in this format so that we can hopefully assemble at least one complete data set so that the class can analyze that, because it looks like people are going to need to kind of trade and borrow data with each other in order to get a complete data set. And so now that's all for now. There will also be a short handout document that walks you through how to download this template, enter your data, or make a copy of this template, I should say, enter your own data, and then share it with me so that we can take a look at it. And so please look at that document. It's also linked on D2L along with this video. Thanks again, and I'll wish you luck with your analysis. Bye.